Welcome to Fort Worth 148's podcast, where we meet to discuss Masonic topics and strive to build value in the Brotherhood. The opinions and statements of the participants do not represent any positions or stance of any Grand Lodge or Lodge and are solely the viewpoints of the participants.
Welcome back to the Fort Worth 148 podcast. My name is Evve Kirkendall. I am the chaplain of Fort Worth 148 and a past master.
I am Brandy Patton, current Worshipful Master of Fort Worth 148.
And this is Cody Cox, current Senior Warden for Fort Worth 148.
It's been a couple of weeks. We took a couple of weeks off because we had some other things going on, but we're back in the recording saddle again, and I don't think that listeners have missed us because we've had enough content going out that we've still maintained a schedule. But we've got a new episode recorded for you today. We've got some things we're going to talk about that deal with lodge finances because
Always a fun subject.
Always a fun subject. And Grand Lodge, of course, is requiring Form 71 to be filled out by September 15th. We are currently recording this prior to September 15th, but it's probably going to come out after September 15th.
It's going to release on the 15th at 6 a.m.
So you are going to be hearing this the day that Form 71 is due. So
That's right. So if you didn't do your Form 71,
here's your reminder.
It's due today.
It's due today. So good luck with that. But in order to talk about it with lodge finances on everyone's mind and Form 71 on everyone's mind, let's go ahead and just talk as a group about this pesky thing that Masons have to deal with every year called dues. What are they for? Why do we have them? What are some good best practices for structuring them? And as the current Worshipful Master and as past masters, both Cody and I, what are some things that you think that we should be thinking about in terms of how lodges are structuring their dues?
I do know that with two former secretaries also sitting in the room, when you say the word dues, we have this kind of adverse reaction. Sometimes it makes us shudder. It makes us want to go into corners and start to cry.
I've noticed that your eye is already...
Yeah, it's twitching just a little bit.
Called a conniption fit.
Yeah, and then of course myself as a former treasurer, so all of this stuff, trust you me guys, if you're out there listening to us, the three of us in this room know any angle that you're coming from on this one. So in our discussion this morning, I wanted to bring up the idea again of what are dues for? What exactly are they supposed to do? So on my way over, I was talking to my friend who begins with an S and ends with Erie. And so I was asking the question, what are dues for? And the definition that it came back with was the idea that dues are payments made to an association in order to be a member and are meant to cover operating expenses for that particular association. If we start there at that ground level, knowing that's what dues are for, I think we can all be on the same level with that one, and we can go from there. So would you guys agree that dues are paid to an organization in order to maintain your membership in that organization, and dues are there in order to operate that particular organization?
I think that's certainly one way that we as lodges across Freemasonry have interpreted it. I think that there are a lot of lodges, however, that have a different perspective on that it is a way to support the operation of a lodge, but they don't price their dues in a way that actually covers the operating costs of the lodge. And they depend on things like fundraisers and raffles and other things, the R word, to actually do the work of covering the operating expenses.
We also need to separate, and it's not just the lodge, it's the Grand Lodge. So our dues go first thing first to pay our per capita Grand Lodge so we can actually operate as a lodge. If we don't cover that, we can't do anything. So we have to make that $27 per member per year plus whatever your temple cost you. So it's not just supporting your lodge, you're supporting the Grand Lodge too.
Right. And you're also supporting your local building. If you happen to have multiple organizations, the operating costs, of course, then get parsed out across different organizations.
Right, and we all pay into the MSP, the MWSA, a little bit of DEMLA, a little bit of Rainbow Girl.
Right, so our lodge dues do represent a lot of different things other than operating expenses. And there are a lot of considerations to come up with for operating expenses. But by and large, you should know when you're a part of a temple organization or a multi-organizational lodge how the utilities are going to get split, who's going to be paying what, how much the maintenance fees are going to be split, all of those things. So you should have a pretty good idea of what your responsibilities as a lodge are and be
Right.
able to plan accordingly so that you can ostensibly cover those operating costs with dues.
And I think for the purpose of our conversation here, we're going to come at it from the idea of if the three of us were in a lodge that owned its building, the only organization that was in that building was the Masonic Lodge. And we're going to hopefully just use some real simple numbers so that our listeners can see where we're headed with this discussion. Because Fort Worth 148, along with the other lodges that are in the temple in Fort Worth, we're in a little bit of a different kind of boat sometimes when it comes to finances, because not only are we paying a per capita to the Grand Lodge of Texas, but we also have a per capita type thing that we pay to the Masonic Temple Association in order for us to meet there. And then everything else on top of that is either expenses that we incur as the lodge for like meals and things like that, but our lodge doesn't necessarily need to worry about electricity or gas or things like that because that's what our per capita to the MTA pays for. In other lodges that we've belonged to where the lodge is standalone, this is where dues come into how much does it cost to run the lights, run the water, pay for the trash, how much money does it cost to turn that AC on?
Mowing the yard.
Insurance, all of these types of things. And we know that insurance is a big thing now, especially for Masonic lodges. It's going up.
Yeah.
Security.
Precipitously.
Security costs too if you own your own building. For
And
sure.
then, and then how much are you tucking away every week, every month, every year to ensure that when that roof needs to be replaced or that AC unit takes a dump on your lawn, how are you going to replace those things? And what is that going to look like?
And let's just be real honest. If we go around the state, I'm not saying this is every lodge, but a majority of lodges, when you look at them, sometimes it really does look like they didn't quite think about that.
I think that's why the reason that we want to talk about this subject, because we have traveled around the state, some of us more than others, and have seen a lot of lodges that look really good. They have definitely kept their lodge in good working order. They have set their dues in a way or have structured their finances in a way to cover everything that needs to be covered. And then there are some lodges that you go into and you're concerned that like a ceiling might fall on you or a light is being held up by baling wire. And those are very realistic expectations. And then the weird thing that I always encounter in those lodges where things are being held together with bubble gum, baling wire, and a prayer is they usually have the lowest of dues assessments that I have ever come across. One lodge that I went into had, things were falling apart. Like doors literally didn't have doorknobs. The bathroom, the doorknob was missing from the bathroom. And so you had to kind of wire it shut and hook the wire on it. And their dues were like $55 a year. And of course, we're talking about a more rural lodge here. So their overhead expenses are going to be a little bit less than what we would have to pay if we had that same lodge in Fort Worth. But you can definitely tell that they had not structured their dues in a way to cover operating expenses and to plan for routine maintenance that needed to happen.
Well,
Exactly.
a lot of those lodges run on the generous support of a couple of members that pay for everything too.
And that is a very unsustainable way of doing business, let's be honest, because eventually if those members hit hard times, if those members move, if those members happen to, God forbid, pass away, suddenly the lodge is structured in a way to depend on them and they are no longer available to financially.
But that's the only reason they even exist is
Right.
generosity of members.
Right. And so I think
great grandpa was a member, grandpa was a member, dad may or may not have been a member. Now I'm a member. They want to maintain that kind of familial line and things like that.
I went to a Golden Trial presentation a couple of years ago, and great brother, he'd been paying for all their postage for the last decade. Nobody even knew it. because we mail a lot of stuff. So
Yeah, postage is expensive.
$300 a year out of his pocket, he was paying for it because the lodge couldn't afford it. Just an example of generosity.
And that is definitely something that keeps Masonry going, is the idea of generosity of spirit. It's definitely a virtue we inculcate.
It's how we operate too. To be honestly, we've
We've got a lot of generous members.
substantial donations.
Yeah, we've got a lot of generous donations. We are financially sustainable because of the generosity of generations past. But I think in this conversation, we really want to look at, so what are the things you need to think about, and what do you need to price into your dues if you want maximum sustainability, meaning you want to be a lodge that is going to be set for not just the next year, not just the next 5 years, but generationally speaking. How do you structure your dues, in your opinions, as treasurers, secretaries, and past masters and masters? How would you approach that problem of, if throwing caution to the wind, throwing everything that, all existing knowledge out the window, how would you structure dues if you were building Lodge Cody and Lodge Brandy? What would your due structures look like?
That's a good question.
I'll be honest. I think the thing that pops into my head, since we're talking about the Form 71, is I would go to Form 71 and look at the things that are on there, because that's been around for a long time.
Let's talk a little bit. What are some of the things that are offhand? I know we don't have a Form 71 in front of us right now. Brandy might be pulling one up on his computer. I don't know. But
Yeah.
what are some of the things that are on there for our
Well,
listeners
it's
who
gonna
might not
talk-
be familiar with a Form 71?
Form 71 is going to have on there, for instance, utilities. It's going to say utilities on there. It's going to have things on there when it's talking about expenses, is insurance. It's going to have things like if you're sending gifts, if you are sending like flowers and things like that. It will have meals on there, those types of things. So it's not exhaustive, but what I would say is if I were brand new to it, like for instance, I'll just share this. When I was getting ready to go into the East, when I started putting my budget together, what I did is I looked at what previous masters had done, and I looked at what was spent, and then I also looked at Form 71 to see what some of those other things, so that I could make some decisions on, this is how much I think I need for this, and this is how much I think I need for insurance and things like that. Because, like it or not, guys, our lodges, yes, we are a fraternal organization, but they are in some instances a business. So there are going to be things that you're going to have to, that you might not be used to thinking about budgeting for in your household, that you need to budget for at the lodge. Say, for instance, postage and things like that. Brandy, you know about this as secretary. There's times that as secretary, I've got to go and get $150 worth of postage stamps to send out things, or I'm going to need money to purchase envelopes, or I'm going to need money to pay for the website and stuff like that. So there's all of these types of things. So again, what I would say is, if I were coming to this as a brand new person, I would go to Form 71 and use it as like a baseline for creating some sort of budget. And then looking at what your lodge has historically spent over the last, we'll say, 3 to 5 years on those particular things.
It also shows your degree fees and how many members pay dues, how many are endowed. So it's basically like your budget that the Grand Lodge sees.
So what I'm hearing from the two of you is best practices would be, one, to start thinking with a budget. If your lodge isn't thinking with a budget in mind, that's probably step one, to set up a budget. Right. And then to set up the budget using the Form 71 as a template, and maybe just going through, what did you spend money on last year, over the last 3 years, as Brandy said, look at those expenses, because if you look over, let's say, 3 years, not only are you going to get to see what you spent money on, but for those recurring expenses like utilities, you see how much each year it went up, so you can plan for the next year. If it seems to go up about $5 or $10 or $20 or maybe 10% per year or something, you can say, if my electricity was $100 and it's been going up 3% per year, then I need to factor in $103 for our budget per month next year.
And the weird thing is, in the last couple of years, I know that we've already kind of mentioned it, but insurance, if your lodge has not looked at insurance or hasn't thought about, you just pay it and you never look at it, you might want to go and look at it, because you're going to probably be paying an exorbitant amount of money. I know that at one of the lodges that I'm a member, the insurance on the building went almost 2 to 3 times as high as it was from one year to the next. Be looking at those. Electricity is always going to be something that's going to be expensive, because I know that here in Fort Worth, Masonic lodges are charged as commercial buildings and not as residential places. It may be different in some rural areas if they're working with a co-op or something like that, but I know that that's not the case. So
Same is true with water utilities.
Right, you need
water
to check with
is
that one.
precipitously more expensive,
Especially if you're a commercial, and most of the time your trash is going to be included with your water and things like that. I would say, if you're out there listening and these are things that you've never heard about and you are on the line and eventually you're going to make yourself available for the East, these are things that you seriously need to start thinking about.
Yeah, you need to be in the conversations with your lodge about those expenses.
That's one thing that I did definitely, is talk to everyone that's going to be Worship Master in the next 5-7 years. You have an idea. Don't make it a secret what your budget is. Tell them how you did it. When I joined, I had no idea how much man we had, what it cost. I knew what our dues were. I immediately looked at, oh, wow, okay, so that's how much we've got to work with. We could actually go 30 years at a current expense level with what we've got and we'd be fine. We're very fortunate. Most lodges can't do that. But you do need to project out 5-10 years down the road.
Absolutely.
And those guys need to be involved in that conversation.
And one of the things that I think that we have done, and this has been a generational thing that we have done over the course of a long period of time, is we have a budget document that's a living document that gets passed from worshipful master to worshipful master. It lives in a Google Drive. And we have this Excel spreadsheet that allows us to see what past expenses we've used. It doesn't always get used exactly that way. We're like giving each other side eye here, because we know how it lives, and we know we're a lodge like everybody else. We know how things happen.
I ripped off Sean's list. He ripped you off.
Yeah, and I ripped off my.
It's called being
Jeremy's.
borrowed and
Yeah.
borrowed.
And Jeremy did
generously.
Gabe's.
And so what we did is we created a template that works really well, and we just superimpose what we want to tweak about that budget every year. And it's like I said, it's a living document.
Right.
But now once we put in the hard work to get it done, now it's not a matter of us having to reinvent the wheel every year. We literally just go through all of those things, and there might be one thing that we're going to remove, or there might be one thing that we're going to add to the budget, and or increase or decrease and tweak things here based on the current realities of our lodge.
One thing I did just to make sure everybody saw it was put on Slack. So every member on Slack saw my budget before
Right.
we voted on it.
But if you're not using as a communication tool, if you don't have some sort of communication tool for your lodge, you are really missing out on the opportunity to be a better communicated lodge, whether that's GroupMe, whether that is Slack, whether that is...
They have all kinds of things.
They have
with them.
tons
Monday,
of apps out there.
all those stuff. Just
Yeah.
go and find one that you're comfortable with.
Slack is great for us because we have a lot of subjects that we like to talk about
Yeah.
that are official, and then there's some that are just like silly stuff, like how to be a better gentleman. And we just share things about tips on being a gentleman, how to wear a 3-piece suit, how to tie a tie, when you should wear black suits. It goes from the business of the lodge all the way to stuff like that, where we are really exploring just fun and silly things. But Slack is free.
I
by the
finally
way.
found my Form 71.
Oh, okay.
Well, fantastic.
Took me that long.
And the thing is that, again, for those of you that are out there that have never seen a Form 71, you have access to it. I believe if you go onto Grandview, you should be able to. If not, you talk to your secretary or your treasurer. They can pull it up through their resources.
Every Master Mason can see what it looks like with a blank form under
Gotcha.
your Master Mason resources. Only the secretary, I believe, can see the filled out one.
Can see the
Or-
fillable PDF.
Or maybe the treasurer, I'm not sure. But yeah, whenever they get it, it's on a separate tab they can download. It's pre-filled out.
I know that as the treasurer, I would get the fillable PDF. It was my job, and by the way, if you did not know this, fellow treasurers, please make sure that you are aware. You are the one that is supposed to fill out the Form 71, and then once it's filled out, you hand that form and all the documentation for that over to your audit committee in order for them to peruse through your books and either approve or ask questions or things like that.
But the beautiful thing about it is the worst on Master suffers if y'all fail. So
Well, yeah.
That's
so-
always the fun part.
yeah.
Always fun. I've been avoiding this, but I'm just going to rip off the Band-Aid since we're talking about dues. If your lodge has not changed its dues in the last 10, 15 years, or even 5 years, this is a conversation that you need to have, because I'm just going to say it, there are lots of lodges out there that don't ever want to talk about dues because it makes members angry, and I hear the answer all the time, if we change our dues, we're going to lose members. My question to that would be is, if you change the dues and you lose members, did you actually have them to begin with?
Absolutely.
And the other thing is, how much, if you're really thinking about dues, let's just ask this question, how much does Masonry mean to you per day? If you think that Masonry is worth $1 a day, then your dues at your lodge should be $365.
And that's where we started. When
if
we
your
went up on
lodge
dues,
dues,
that's what the calculation we made.
think about it. If your lodge dues are, say, for instance, $100, you're saying that Masonry is worth 36.5 cents a day? I'm just challenging people here to think about.
And I think that it's not even about so much that conversation. I think the framing that I would look at it is Freemasonry ultimately has to be based on a value conversation. We talk about in our lodge all the time about value. What are you getting for your dues? And what kind of experience can a lodge possibly supply based on certain dues? If your lodge dues are $75 a year and you're having to have dinner brought in by some other organization or somebody else, and you do nothing besides stated meetings and maybe one event a year, what are you doing? What is the point?
Where's the value?
Yeah,
Right.
where is the value of that $100? That $100 is just paying for me to go sit and listen to a secretary read notes and a treasurer go over a treasurer's report and then bicker about which bills we're going to pay. That is not Freemasonry. If that is what I had to suffer through, I would tell you I would not be a part of that lodge at all. And I'm not saying that every lodge needs to be Fort Worth 148. Not every lodge needs to have a podcast. Not every lodge needs to have a black tie gala. Not every lodge needs to have catered meals. That's not what I'm saying. And not every lodge needs to have exorbitantly priced dues. But the calculation needs to be, we need dues that can cover the cost of our expenses, and we need expensive dues that are going to cover the cost of brotherhood. What events are we going to put into this? And if that means we need to fundraise for it, then maybe we need to fundraise for it. I can understand that.
Absolutely.
But Masonry has to be an experience at on the bottom line. And if you're wondering why nobody is coming to join your lodge, the first place that I would start is a conversation about value. What am I getting? What am I getting? And if my members aren't even excited to be there, then that means there isn't a value.
And I think with what you said, Evve, there's two things that I've heard quite a few times since I've been a Mason that I feel like I have answers for. One is the idea of when the conversation of dues going up, and then you have people that say, if dues go up, then what about our older members that are on fixed incomes and things like that? There's a very simple answer to that one. If you have older members that are on a fixed income, that if you went from, we'll say, $100 to $150, and that might knock them out for the year, then that's where the lodge needs to have a conversation with itself and go, how do we possibly cover this $50 for this particular member? Because it's not going to be a ton of them, but you are going to have some older members that may not be able to bear that brunt. So that's where, God forbid, we come together as a fraternity and show compassion and kind of throw out that assistance to our brothers, especially if you've got older members that have been around for
Or
30,
just remit them.
35 years. Absolutely.
$50 of their dues. Keep them locked in at $100, but everybody else goes up to $150.
Feel free
It should be the exception, not the rule.
Yeah. Feel free to grandfather them in if you want to.
It's so easy to do that. As secretary, you can go in there and adjust the dues amount per member if you want to.
And literally with just a vote of the voting members of your lodge, you can easily
You
remit
don't,
the dues.
you don't even have to vote. Worshipful master remits it. It happens.
Then I know that in our lodge, we often vote to remit if there's a question about whether or not it's a good idea. But oftentimes we don't want to embarrass a member either who might be in a financial difficulty. So we might just say, does anybody have a problem with remitting of the dues of a brother who's
Right.
experiencing financial
Exactly.
problems? We leave their name out of it and their circumstance out of it so that they can't be identified. And then the vote is almost always unanimous.
And the thing about it is, if you really think about it, in those kinds of conversations, really the only people that need to be in on that conversation would be the secretary, maybe the treasurer, the worshipful master, and maybe the senior and junior wardens. So you have your 5 principal officers
And it
that are
might
in
come
on
through
that conversation.
if you happen to have a fraternal assistance committee like we do, it might come through that, or the help aid and assistance.
And of course, we
committee.
have fraternal assistants. Every lodge is supposed to have a fraternal assistance. And again, that's the 3 primary officers. And again, we've said this before, but like the reason you elect officers is because you trust them to make decisions for the lodge.
So everything doesn't have to be voted on every single time.
Absolutely.
And Texas does not have an almoner, so we all take that role.
And the other thing that you were talking about, Evve, was you had mentioned fundraising. And in my opinion, when we start talking about fundraising, if you as a lodge are fundraising because you have to keep the lights on, or if you're fundraising because you have something that's a normal expense that you can't afford, then that's where you really need to be looking at dues. Fundraising is something that is like a capital campaign. It should be for a specific purpose.
And perhaps above and beyond spending, not
exactly.
regular routine maintenance.
So your fundraising should be for things like for your scholarships. You should be fundraising if your air conditioning is about to take a crap on the lawn. Then maybe that's where you as a lodge say, okay, we need to do a fundraiser so that we can quickly get that capital for that. If it's not somewhere hidden away, that's what fundraising should be. Fundraising should never be on the mind of a lodge in order to pay a regular type of bill. That's really not where it should be.
And I would also challenge, this might be a hot take. I don't know. We'll see how this room feels about this. I tend to think that, especially in Masonic organizations, fundraisers tend to be bad ideas. And here's why. Who is coming to your fundraiser?
Oh, yeah.
Your Mason brothers. So essentially what you're doing is creating a lot of work in an event for the people who are already in your lodge to come buy your catfish or your pancakes or your sausage breakfast, or whatever it is, your breakfast tacos. And they are just spending more of their own money to buy something that the lodge
That they already
spent money
purchased.
on that they could have just given the money for in the first place in their dues.
This varies by lodge.
I agree. And there are certain places where fundraisers are okay. But like Cody's saying, if it is for basic dues and like it should be dues things, I don't like the idea of nickel and diming people to death. Just set your dues at a certain level that can cover the expenses that you need to cover, and then do fundraisers for the fun things or the above and beyond things or the unexpected emergency things that maybe you haven't had the wherewithal to set money aside for. Let your fundraisers do that, and it should be a rare event fundraising. You might be that one lodge, and I know that there are a couple of lodges that do like big fundraising events. They do golf tournaments, and
Right.
they do the
did one
giant
last-
fish fries.
We went to one last night.
Yes, and those are great events. And if you have the wherewithal to put a fundraiser together that is something like that, great, good on you. Keep it going. And generally speaking, maybe those are big enough to even fund your operations for a year and keep dues a little bit lower. That's great. I don't have a problem with that. But I also think that most lodges, that is not the case. The fundraisers that they end up doing are useless, and it's just a way to extort more money out of members that just make your dues $5 a year more expensive, or $10 or $15 a year, and forego the pancake breakfast that only members show up for anyway.
And I would say if we have listeners out there that your lodge does some sort of fundraising event every year where, again, your members are not being taxed on that one and you're getting a lot of non-Masonic money into your wallet, we'd like to hear from you about that event so that you can tell us this is where it started, this is how we do it, because your event might be something that another lodge could mimic and do and make some money. Again, we've talked about this before. Part of the reason we do this podcast is because we're trying to build value into the Masonic community. So if there's something that you're doing that you would be willing to share with our listeners, please let us know.
Yeah, don't gatekeep.
Absolutely not.
And one of the things that I think that also, when we talk about how we're structuring dues, one of the things that I think that ends up being, and I've heard it talked about at OLT, I've heard it talked about in various venues, is that you make a list of your expenses, and then you make a list of your membership, and then you say, okay, our annual expenses are this amount, and then we have this many members, and so you divide the expenses by the total number of members, and that's how much your dues are. That seems so. If you've got $10,000 a year in expenses, and you have 100 members,
right?
Am I doing the math right? Saying that's $100 per member.
The math is mathing.
The math is mathing. Okay.
Well, $127.50. You got to pay Grand Lodge.
But no, I'm saying that the $27.50 is coming out of the $100.
Okay.
You have factored in all of your expenses. The $10,000 includes all of your capital, your assessments, all of your bills, all of your electricity, all of your water. You've even got like a little line item that says periodic repairs. You have literally got everything, and your everything is 10 grand a year, and you have 100 members. That means each member, to cover all of the expenses, should be $100, right?
But reality, you're at $7,200 because of the per capita.
But what I'm saying is that $10,000, even though $720, how much ever it is, the capital assessment's going away.
We're not mathematicians.
What we're saying is that $10,000.
It's included in the $10,000.
Everything is, the expenses are $10,000, and our assessments are included in that $10,000 operating cost. And here's the curveball that I think that every lodge needs to hear, is that while that sounds right on the surface, it's not. And we just found out exactly why it's not on Texas Freemasons. Because we just discovered that somebody put the numbers together for us. It was Zach Hastings. He listed a pie chart for us, the number of dues-paying members, the percentage of dues-paying members, the percentage of endowed members, and the percentage of service-exempt. We found out that that across the state, and not every lodge is going to break down exactly like this, I'm aware, but 20% of Texas Freemasons are dues exempt because they're service exempt. Then we have 33% of the Texas Masons are endowed. So that means 47% of a lodge, ostensibly, if you're shaking out this amount, 47% of your dues-paying members have to cover the cost of doing business, because the other 53% are not paying dues. So that means if you are that lodge that has $10,000 worth of expenses, you cannot depend on 53% of your members helping out with that $10,000, because they are either endowed or service exempt. And that would mean that you need to divide that $10,000 expenses by 47% of your membership.
And I just pulled up the pie chart. It was posted 5 days ago from this podcast. Endowed members, so those are endowed members, 33%. Other exempt members is 1%. 50-year members, or TMRC, compose 19%. And this is of Texas membership. And then annual dues payers composes 47%.
Right. And so that would mean that if we are at Lodge Cody, and Lodge Cody has $10,000 worth of expenses, and Lodge Cody has 100 members on the rolls, if his lodge breaks down the way that this pie chart breaks out, then that means that the annual dues assessment, if we're trying to cover all of our dues, all of our expenses with our dues, that means that it's not going to be $100 a member. It's actually going to be $212.76 per dues paying member.
Because you're only going to have 47 of those 100 members paying dues.
Yes. So whenever you're doing this calculation, gentlemen out there who are planning for wondering why maybe your lodge is not operating with the right amount of money, or your dues never seems to cover the amount, or you feel like you're always on a hamster wheel, you need to look at how many of your members are service exempt, dues exempt, and then structure your dues for only dues paying members if your goal is to have your dues cover all of your expenses.
The one variable that's not listed is endowed members who are also exempt.
And that's
the one saving grace for it. But that number right now, of course, the further along you go, the more that number is going to be as they pass away, move to TMRSC, whatever. It's a number I'd love to see, just for curiosity's sake.
I mean, some of those, this isn't a perfect example.
It's
and
not.
I realize that these numbers are fuzzy at best. To look at this as an exact representation of exactly, and think about how many of those endowments are multiple lodge endowments. One person being endowed in multiple lodges.
Yeah, but the other factor too is it's only $5.04 per unit that you get back.
Which means at the lowest endowment rate, which is $500, you're only getting back $25.
And even in
average.
Which is also the passed away endowed members. We're getting that at $500.
Right.
And it says on here, by the way, somebody had asked on this strand here, do these numbers reflect plural memberships? And Brother Haston responded and said, yes, this is memberships, and the total pie is total memberships, not people. So if someone is a member of two lodges, endowed in one and paying dues in the other, they have a count in each slice. If you go to this one, again, take a look through the comments and stuff like that. But for the sake of argument, we're using those numbers to, again, let's just get out there, we're challenging lodges that if you haven't thought about this in a long time, or if this isn't something that you're thinking about, it really should be something that you're
It should be
considering.
front of mind, especially
Absolutely.
if you haven't looked at your lodge dues. And also, I am not an elitist who thinks that every lodge needs to have exorbitant dues. I think that your dues should cover the cost of your lodge operating and being able to keep your lodge in good repair.
I think the gist and summary is you need to take a look at the money you're actually bringing in reality compared to what you're putting out. That's what a budget
Absolutely.
is. But don't count on your 100 members paying $400. The math doesn't work.
Yeah,
Because
and you can't
47 of those are paying.
And you can't always start off. Let's be honest. If you are a $50 a year lodge and you are barely scraping by and you're not able to cover the cost of expenses, and then you suddenly look and it's going to take you $150 to get to that point, going up on your dues from 50 to 150,
Yeah, tripling
that's a
your
bad
dues,
idea.
that's a bad idea.
That's a really bad idea. Most lodges are not going to be able to survive that, or you're going to chase people away.
Evie, when you're talking about this, I think it might be important for you because you and I have talked about this. And maybe share with the brothers out there your thought on like a trigger clause. This might be something that they could also think about as well.
And this is I'm not going to lie that this is not. I don't even think it's popular in this room.
I'm ready to argue.
Brandy is definitely against this idea, and I understand why. But I think that lodges are terrible at being good
Proactive.
stewards and proactive about going up on their dues. And I think that if you have your due, like 148, I think we have our dues in our rules and regulations, not in our bylaws.
Correct.
So we can vote at any moment to go up on our dues without having to change bylaws.
And actually, if you look at Texas Grand Lodge law, if I'm correct, lodges do have that. They do have that autonomy
Yeah.
to change their dues when they see fit. The only thing that lodges can only do once a year is when they start talking about endowments.
And that's all fine and well. And I think we're planning on having an endowment conversation here in just a few minutes. But, and I've got some strong opinions about that.
He's got some hot takes.
I've got some hot takes. But when it comes to trigger clauses, I think that lodges should really have a strong look in the mirror and see, honestly, how well are you at having the going up on lodge dues conversations? Because if you are that lodge that it comes up once every 5 years and it suddenly devolves into a rather spicy conversation in the lodge room and nothing ends up happening, then a trigger clause is a perfect rule for you, meaning that you set up the rule so that every so often the trigger clause takes effect and it automatically increases the dues by a certain amount. I think a hardcore, like a hard number, is preferable to a percentage. One of the things that Brandy brought up to me in the conversations that we were having leading up to this recording was that he really wants to know what he's committing to. If he's going to pay dues to a certain organization, he wants to know what those dues are going to be. And if you factor in a trigger clause that says that your dues are automatically going to adjust every year the percentage of, let's say, inflation. All of a sudden, you are introducing a variable into the equation that I think is unfair, because every member is not going to know what the rate of inflation this year is going to be until that number gets published. And it might be 15% for all we know.
Right.
It might be 2% for all we know. That is, I don't think, is a fair assessment. I think that going up on dues anywhere from $2 to $5 per year triggered in every single year, I think is a very prudent option to make sure that you don't go 10 years without going up on dues. Because if you wait 10 years to go up on your dues, you're going to effectively have to go up 50 to 100% in your dues to just cover the cost of your utilities having increased in inflation. I am a huge fan of trigger clauses with a finite number attached to them. Not everybody likes that idea. I know that there are lots of people who probably have strong opinions against it. But I also know how bad at talking about money lodges are.
I think I see a happy medium here. We could do a trigger clause whenever you join. You know what our dues are, and we suggest a donation of this amount every year on top of that under certain conditions. That way it's not mandatory.
Yeah, but here's the problem. Using our lodge as an example, Brandy and I had this conversation not even 20 minutes ago. Where we talked about when we ask our lodge members, and our lodge members are remarkably generous. And I respect every member that is endowed. I do not think that we should be asking our endowed members for more money. But even when we ask and we say, hey, it would be really helpful for the lodge if you as an endowed member who's not paying dues were to, let's say, be willing to donate any amount, but here's the amount we pay for your per capita every year. We get a ridiculously small number of people of our total membership who do not pay dues, or pay a reduced amount of dues, who are willing to pay extra. And when I say a ridiculously small number, I would probably say less than 5% of the people who we ask.
It's actually 5 is the number.
Yeah. So if we got about 120 members on our rolls right now, that's about 5%. So that is, while I appreciate that and I understand that, the reality of on the back end of that, it's not a sustainable option.
But the way we got those 5 is when I was secretary, and I don't know if you do this or not, but I would actually, when I sent dues cards out, I would send a personalized letter for them saying, thank you for this many years. So the guys that were also service that were capable knew, hey, you're coming up, call us. But I would also break down the numbers of what it cost every member and just ask for $87 on top of whatever it was, because that's what the extra cost was. That's just to have the lodge. That's not deals, no parties, none of that.
Sure.
And it worked
for 5 people, though.
A few people,
and that's my big heartburn, is that I don't think it's ethical for us to say, and this is we're gonna close up this conversation here momentarily and start into the endowments conversation.
that might be another podcast because we're at 47 minutes.
Okay. But I really feel strongly that if we are going to tell people that they don't have to pay dues for the rest of their lives,
We didn't tell them that.
but that's the arrangement that they made because of the Grand Lodge, and so we should be honoring that. And one of the things that I know that has come up in our lodge is that when we have these kind of conversations, it makes endowed members feel inferior or like we're like disparaging them,
Right?
Because we want more money from them, and the lodge is often losing money on their endowment.
Oh, if I could buy a $500 endowment right now, I would do it.
Yeah, because you make out like a bandit.
I would probably donate on top of that.
But that's the thing, is that you're not required to. And then I think it's somewhat unethical to then go to a member and say, oh, our lodge is out almost $100 a year on the temple assessment and the per capita assessment. Would you be willing to donate that extra money? I think that's just an unethical thing to do. And I think it makes the member feel like we're more interested in their money than we are in their membership and them as a person.
Right.
And it makes them a commodity that we are leeching onto rather than a true brotherhood. And that's why I have a problem with that sort of thing. And I think trigger clauses keep us ethical, but they also keep our dues going up in a respectable way that is not going to crush anyone's budget over the course of any 1 year.
Just to summarize, you just got to be responsible with money and to figure out what it really costs and adjust accordingly.
And that's the key, I think, is every lodge has a different context. What works at 148 is definitely not going to work in a rural.
Oh, it won't work for other lodges in our building.
Yeah, and there's plenty of there. It might not work in our. We are transparently, our lodge is $400 a year right now, and they're about to go up potentially again because of some.
Not on my watch.
Not on your watch, but at some point in the future.
My last meeting in June, we might talk about it, like you did.
It's a great idea.
Can't vote me out now.
Can't chew me
Yeah,
up.
thanks for putting the bullseye on the next guy that's coming up. Appreciate that.
Yeah, but I think that there's something to that. I think there's something to having the conversation and being respectful to the people who got endowed, even if that endowment was a bad investment. It is a matter of respect to those members. And I never want to make an endowed member feel like I am more interested in their money than I am about them. But every lodge has a different context, and you have to do what's best for your lodge. But I will be adamant, and I will have this conversation with anybody at any lodge that I go to. If your lodge is run down and you don't have the money to do the necessary repairs, you are fundamentally doing a disservice to your lodge. I don't think that's an unfair thing to say.
No, and I'll go even further with that and would challenge people to think about that. If your lodge building, we're not talking about the people, the lodge building, if you were to come up to your lodge building and you don't have the funds in order to make repairs to it to make sure that the building looks a particular way or looks nice or attractive to new members or something like that, not only are you affecting your own membership, but let's be honest, what does that say about the fraternity as a whole? We know that there are people that look at individual places and then cast that same type of judgment upon the institution as a whole. Let's just call it what it is. Is that putting a spot in someone's mind on Freemasonry as an institution?
And is that inhibiting your ability to grow as a lodge too? If your lodge is run down and you are having trouble getting members and you can barely afford to cover the costs of running your lodge, the big question that I'm going to have is your lack of membership a function of the fact that you've been financially irresponsible with the stewardship of your lodge building?
Yeah, and I think what we're also touching on, and maybe we didn't think about this prior to, but what we're really talking about here is that as lodges, when we're looking at finances, when we're looking at the Form 71, when we're doing anything with finances, are we perpetuating the I don't want to talk about things that are uncomfortable because it just doesn't feel right? Or do you have to belly up to the bar and be the squeaky wheel that says, hey, by the way, the math isn't mathing. We need to think about this. We understand this is going to be an uncomfortable situation and an uncomfortable conversation that the lodge may not want to have. But eventually, either you have the conversation and you fix what needs to be fixed, or prepare yourself to put the closed sign on the door.
That's one of the conversations that we had, I think, in our temple association, is that we have been operating at the Fort Worth Temple at a pretty significant loss in terms of the amount that it costs to run that building versus the amount that the Temple Association is receiving in assessments. And there was a huge resistance to going up on the temple assessments to make sure that we are covering the costs. And I'll be the first person to say I think my picture was on the dartboard of every one of the Temple Association members. It probably still is. It might be after I bring this up. But the big heartburn that I have is that we have to be able to pay for our buildings. We, as an institution, have a lot of history, and too many lodges are selling off really historic buildings. And we are selling off too much of our history because we have been bad stewards of that history. And I don't want to see the historic Henderson Street Temple get sold to some real estate developer and turned into a shopping center,
The next Hotel Zaza
or another a hotel, or who knows what,
Retirement home.
or a retirement home, or whatever it gets turned into. That drives me crazy, because that just means that we've been bad stewards. And I also realize that there are certain circumstances where you can't increase your dues in some cases to sustainability. That there comes a point where it's cost prohibitive. You can't just pay on the backs of your membership, but you have to find ways to balance those two equations. You have to find ways to balance what is the difference between our expenses, our dues, and any fundraising we need to do to match the gap, and what are some other funding streams that we can investigate.
And I would say too that in this conversation that we're having here about dues, about finances for the lodge and things like that, it may seem like the guys at 148, why are they talking about this? They're financially solvent. We still have these conversations because we want to stay financially solvent. There are things that happen that we are not quite sure of and things like that.
We're only solvent as
Right.
long as we can keep the temple up and going. If for some reason the temple decided to close or
Our
to sell
home
that
is
building,
gone.
our home is gone. Suddenly, the nest egg that we have in our investment accounts suddenly has to go to finding us a new home, and
Right.
that will dry us up real fast.
Oh, real fast. I know of a lodge that they were offered, this was probably like 8 or 9 years ago, they were offered something like $500,000 for their lodge building, which seems like a fantastic amount of money. But the conversation also came down to, where can we go and find something like what we have anywhere near this area for $500,000? And that wasn't going to happen. They were going to have to move like 20 or 30 miles away in order to be able to even afford land so that they could purchase a building and all that kind of stuff. That is something that, again, lodges, I don't think they're necessarily sometimes thinking about the replacement costs. We know for Fort Worth 148, in order for us to replace what we currently have, if we were to go, there would be no place downtown that we could go
Absolutely
and even rent a place to go. So there are other lodges that we could probably go in with and rent their facilities and stuff like that. But the reality is that if the temple were to go away, we do not have a home. It would drain our bank accounts in order to find a new home, and our new home would potentially be out past Alito or something
If we
like
got
that.
our own.
Right.
We would probably have to partner up with another lodge and merge with another lodge, or share a building with another lodge. It would be a disaster. And we consider ourselves a pretty strongly financed lodge, comparatively speaking, to some of the lodges that we're talking about.
Another thing that I would suggest is, and I know listeners, I know that you've heard a lot of stuff and we're talking about this, and hopefully you can also tell that this is something that we have thought a lot about, not just as members, but as past masters, as secretaries, as treasurers. If you have never gone and looked at when your lodge began, what was the dues that were charged back then, there's this fantastic thing called the internet. You can get on the internet and you can go and find out how much was, we'll say $25 in 1933 or something like that. And you can see that the guys back then were making a substantial investment into their lodge. And my challenge would be, are your guys still making that investment?
621.25 today, just based on the CPI
621.25
today.
So if your lodge opened in 1933 and the guys were paying $25 a year to be a member of that lodge, that's the equivalent of $621.65 today.
And I will speak to the members of our lodge, 148 right now, that when our lodge was founded back in
1855.
in 1855, our dues would be about $800 right now. Amount of
Realistically,
inflation.
1933, nobody was paying that much. It was $10, $15.
I think at one of my lodges, which was founded in 1906, the dues at the beginning were like $5. But still, even then,
But even still, that's still
They're-
hundreds of dollars more expensive than what most lodges are right now if you factor in the year that your lodge was founded for inflation.
And we also had 1,000+ members paying that,
right.
which we don't now.
And see, I'll just throw it out there, Tarrant Lodge, the lodge that I was master of the first time around, at one time, Tarrant Lodge, I think this was back in the 40s, had over 2,500 like dues paying members. But even then it was still like 15 or 20 bucks for the year. But again, we're talking in the 1940s, all that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of money, and eventually that's why Tarrant had such a big building on the north side of Fort Worth. But fast forward to today,
You got a bigger, more beautiful building.
again, it's one of those things. So
You're paying rent, but
I think with what I'm getting at here, in a roundabout way, is if you're looking for a baseline for your lodge to have this conversation, looking at Form 71, find out how much you guys were paying in dues when the lodge opened, get onto the internet and see how much that is according to today based on inflation, and see, are you keeping pace with where your brothers were at when the lodge opened? If not, then you guys have some family business that needs to be discussed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And this whole conversation about dues is also during a conversation that we as 148 are having about finances and the future of our lodge and what we want to do and what we dream that it could be and what we dream that it can be. And so I don't want anybody to think that we're sitting up here, in the
This
ivory
is not
tower.
the ivory tower.
We're not in an ivory tower preaching down at people.
pontificating.
Yeah, we're definitely not punching down
So,
at anyone.
what we do different-
We're having this conversation in live as this is being recorded.
Yeah, and we're also going to talk about it in a couple of weeks at our retreat, and we don't do it in an open meeting
Right.
because it's a 3-hour conversation.
Yeah.
It was literally 8 hours the first one I went
Nobody
to.
really wants to beat that dead horse.
Yeah, we want
Consistently.
and generally speaking, when we want to have these conversations, we have them outside of lodge, and then what we bring to the lodge are the best ideas,
Right.
that we can then kick around. And usually, by the time that we've kicked everything around outside of lodge, what we end up bringing to the lodge and the voting members are really good ideas that we have already troubleshooted. I don't know, both and they get the best and the most curated ideas of us. They don't get the first draft of our financial ideas.
Yeah, no.
Don't do first drafting at your lodges.
And as two past masters and a current worshipful master, I would think that all three of us would agree that when it comes to discussions of finances and stuff like that, your first round of bickering should not be in open lodge. You do
Never.
not want to be there for 3 or 4 hours. And peace and harmony. We
Peace
want to
and
make
harmony.
peace and harmony. Okay, we want to make sure
Peace,
that
harmony.
Okay, listen, it's not the names
you
of
need
your
to get
two.
that tattooed on your
That's
arms.
right. We're gonna get
Right arm is
tattoos. Peace and harmony.
Left
You know,
fist is harmony.
yeah, there was peace and harmony that prevailed. Trust you me, ding ding. But again, I would say the three of us would agree that the first round of bickering when it comes to lodge finances does not need to happen on the lodge floor. This is where your officers need to get together, maybe bring in some of those past masters because they have familiarity with that kind of stuff. Have that discussion. As Evve said, curate what needs to be said, then bring that to the lodge and have them do that.
Yeah, bring your final draft of ideas to the lodge when
Now,
you're having these conversations.
For those of you that were out there salivating when you heard Evve talk about the idea of endowments, we're going to be getting into that at another podcast. Because
That'll be our next episode.
Yeah, we know that's really important, and trust you me, Evve has some hot takes.
Yeah,
and I
tune
know
in for our next episode
Yes.
because let me tell you, I've got some spicy takes on
it's a barn burner.
I have been thinking about this, and Cody got to hear last night on a car ride how fired up I am about this particular topic.
So on that note, let's put a pin in it.
Yeah, let's put a pin in it.
Oh, trust me,
to be continued.
That balloon is popped.
So if you have any questions or comments about what we've talked about today when it comes to finances and especially lodge dues, please leave them in the comments below, whatever podcast platform you happen to be on. We have been reviewing them. We look at our comments regularly. We really appreciate everybody who engages. Please and share on these on these platforms. It really helps the algorithm let other Masons know that we are a podcast that you liked And tell your brothers about this podcast if you find that it gave you some value or gave you something to think about. You might not agree with everything we said. Comment down below about how wrong I am. Tell me how trigger resolutions and things are terrible ideas. I want to hear it because I want to know where I'm wrong.
And if you're from out of state, we'd love to hear from you too.
Yeah, how does your state handle it?
How does this
Or
how
your
is this
grand
handled?
jurisdiction?
Exactly. We'd love to hear it.
We'd love to hear from it. If you want to email us, feel free to do that. If you want to reach out to us personally, all of us are on the social medias. You can find us on the Facebook, on the Instagram, and at fortworthlodge.com. That's our website. Feel free to reach out to us. We're really excited, and we love hearing about it. All three of us are going to be at Grand Lodge this year, so we are excited to see everybody. We'll have a resolutions edition at some point when we get the resolutions. We are excited about that. That's always a hot topic.
If you're at Grand Lodge and you want to come and say hi, come and look for the people that are up in the balcony that look like they're about to heckle somebody. That's probably us.
We're
probably us.
We're the old Muppets.
We're Waldorf and what's his name up there. Yep.
They're not half bad.
They're all bad.
At any rate, gentlemen, my name is Evve Kirkendall, and I am signing off.
Brandy Patton, sign off.
And Cody Cox signing off.